Late afternoon light spilled through the dusty windows of Dry Creek's only seamstress shop, landing on bolts of calico and lace that Martha Lyle had stacked with the precision of a woman who'd learned to make beauty behave. The bell above her door jingled, and 3 young brides-to-be swept in, chattering like sparrows, ribbons fluttering, cheeks pink with dreams. Martha smiled the way she always did, gentle, practiced, careful not to show her teeth. They barely noticed her beyond the measuring tape around her neck. To them, she was simply Miss Lyle, the reliable woman who made sure their dresses fit just right, no matter how the fabric tugged or the seams strained. As they twirled before the mirror, one girl whispered, "She can make anyone look good, even if the Lord gave you little to work with." The others giggled. Martha pretended she hadn't heard. When they left, the room fell quiet again. Only the soft hum of her sewing machine filled the air. The rhythmic click of the needle steadied her heart. She had stitched for every wedding in Dry Creek these past 10 years, but never for her own. Outside, laughter carried down from the church social gathering at the square. Martha tidied the shop, dusted her hands on her apron, and decided to close early. Maybe she'd walk there. Maybe it would remind her she was still part of the town, even if she'd long stopped believing she could belong. The square shimmered with lamplight and fiddle tunes. Couples danced beneath the bunting. Children darted between tables laden with pies. The air smelled of cinnamon and hay. Martha stood near the lemonade stand, holding a cup she didn't drink from. She nodded politely to those who greeted her, but most eyes slid past. At a nearby table, 2 women leaned close, whispering behind lace fans. "She's got hands like an angel, but mercy. That waist could use a miracle," one said. "Who'd marry her?" The other replied, chuckling softly. "No man wants a wife he can't lift onto a horse." The words cut through her like a pin driven too deep. She smiled anyway. Habit was stronger than heartbreak. "Evening, Miss Lyle," called Pastor Glenn, kind as ever. "We'll need your stitching soon. 2 more weddings this summer." Martha lifted her chin, nodded, and murmured, "Of course, Pastor." Her voice didn't tremble until she turned away. As the dance continued, she slipped home through the side street, her steps measured, her shoulders rigid. The stars overhead blurred in her vision as though the night itself couldn't quite look her in the eye. Her little shop was dark except for the glow of a single oil lamp. Dust motes floated in the amber light. She sat at her work table and opened a cedar chest at her feet. Inside lay a half-finished wedding dress, yellowed at the edges. Its lace delicate, its bodice wide. She'd sewn it years ago, when she still thought someone might look at her the way brides were looked at in town squares and chapel aisles. She ran a hand over the fabric, tracing where the thread had unraveled. Her throat tightened. "Foolish," she whispered. "Foolish to think anyone would ever want." She stopped herself, lips trembling. A long silence stretched through the room. Then, with a sudden fierceness, she stood. The lamp flame quivered as she gathered the dress in her arms and carried it outside. The night air was sharp and still. Behind the shop, in a rusted wash basin, she struck a match. For a moment, the flame hesitated, then caught. Lace curled and blackened, the fire eating away every careful stitch, every hour of hope she'd once sewn into it. The smell of burnt silk rose like a confession. When it was done, she sat on the steps, staring at the ash until dawn began to pale the sky. The town would wake soon. Brides would come with their ribbons and dreams, and Martha would sew them into perfection again. But tonight, as smoke drifted upward, she whispered to the empty street, "No one wants a fat bride." And the only answer was the wind moving through the cottonwoods, soft and indifferent. She drew her shawl tight around her shoulders and turned back inside, her heart as neatly buttoned shut as the gowns she made for everyone else. The morning after the fire, Dry Creek stirred to life under a pale wash of sunrise. The air smelled faintly of rain and smoke, though only Martha knew why. She swept the front steps of her shop, hiding the ashes behind the water trough, pretending the world hadn't changed overnight. By 9 o'clock, brides were already arriving for fittings, and her hands moved with the same steady grace. Needle, thread, hem, each stitch a prayer for peace she didn't truly feel. When the last client left, she exhaled, rubbed her aching wrists, and reached for her teacup. That's when the bell above the door jingled. A tall figure stood in the doorway, broad shoulders, dusty hat in his hands. Bo Ramsey. She recognized him at once, the widowed rancher who lived beyond the South Ridge. A quiet man, known for mending fences alone and speaking only when he had something worth saying. "Morning, Miss Lyle," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Mr. Ramsey," she replied, adjusting her spectacles. "What brings you to town?" He looked around the shop, his eyes pausing on the spools of lace and muslin hanging neatly on the wall. "Heard you're the best seamstress in 3 counties. "I do my best," she said cautiously. "Is there a rip to mend? A shirt to patch?" Bo hesitated. "Not exactly." He set his hat down, took a folded sketch from his coat, and placed it on her table. It was a drawing, rough, done in pencil, but she knew what it was instantly. A wedding dress. Her stomach tightened. "For a friend of yours?" Bo met her gaze. "For a bride," she nodded briskly, her smile automatic. "Then she's a lucky woman. Do you have her measurements?" He didn't answer right away. He looked around again, almost shy, then said softly, "Not yet." Martha blinked. "You mean she's not chosen the style?" "No," he said. "She's not chosen me." Her hand stilled on the fabric. The air between them felt heavy with something unspoken. "I see," she said, though she didn't. "So you're having the dress made in faith?" "In hope," Bo replied, his voice steady but warm. "There's been enough waiting. Thought it might be time to prepare for something better." Martha swallowed hard. Men in Dry Creek didn't speak like that. She tried to smile. "That's a fine sentiment, Mr. Ramsey. What did you have in mind?" He shrugged slightly. "Something simple. Nothing grand, just something made with care." She nodded, eyes down, pretending to jot notes on her pad. Her pulse raced for reasons she didn't understand. When he left, she walked him to the door, her composure returning in practiced pieces. Bo paused on the threshold, hat in hand again. "Thank you, Miss Lyle. I'll come by next week to see how it's coming along." "I'll have sketches ready," she said, her tone polite, distant. As he stepped into the sun, he turned once more and added, "It's not for her yet, it's for Hope." Then he walked down the road, boots crunching gravel, shoulders squared against the wind. Martha stood frozen long after he was gone. She stared at the empty doorway, the sound of his words lingering in her ears. "For Hope," she whispered, testing how it felt on her tongue. She sank into her chair, fingertips brushing the edges of the sketch he'd left. A simple gown, clean lines, modest lace at the collar, wide sleeves made for comfort, not display. She knew it wasn't meant for a woman of fancy beauty. It was meant for someone real, someone sturdy. Her breath hitched as she realized she could picture herself in it. She pushed the thought away instantly, cheeks burning. "Don't be foolish," she murmured, folding the paper sharply. "You're just his seamstress." But that night, as she locked the shop, she found herself glancing toward the southern ridge, where Bo's lanterns would be flickering across the fields. And though she told herself it was nonsense, she couldn't stop hearing his voice. "It's not for her yet, it's for Hope." She lay awake for hours, the image of that quiet rancher and his steady eyes refusing to leave her mind. By dawn, she'd decided to make the dress. Not because she believed it was for her, but because Hope, she told herself, deserved a chance to take shape, even if it wasn't hers to wear. Bo Ramsey returned to Martha's shop 3 days later, earlier than promised, with a basket of eggs and a bundle of mended fence wire. "You fixed my gate latch last winter," he said, setting them down near her counter. "Figured I'd return the favor." Martha blinked. "Mr. Ramsey, that wasn't necessary." "Maybe not," he replied, pulling off his gloves. "But I like even trades." He spoke little after that. just nodded toward the muslin mock-up she'd draped over the mannequin. "Looks finer than I imagined," he murmured. Martha's heart did something unfamiliar then, a flutter she quickly disguised as a cough. "It's just the first draft," she said, adjusting the pins at the shoulder. "If your intended prefers lace, we can add." He cut in gently. "I'll trust your judgment." Her fingers hesitated. Most men wanted control about fabric, cost, everything. But Beau's calm tone carried a kind of faith that startled her. She smiled faintly. "Very well." After that day, Beau kept finding reasons to stop by. One morning, he brought her a small pail of fresh milk. The next week, a bag of nails she hadn't asked for. "I was in town anyhow," he'd say. Though Martha doubted that was true, his ranch sat 5 miles out. When the latch on her shop door broke, he fixed it without being asked. When the handle of her sewing table loosened, he tightened it in silence, hands steady and sure. In return, she began mending his shirts, old denim faded from sun and work. She didn't charge him. She said it was for practice. He didn't argue. He just wore them again with his sleeves rolled up and tipped his hat whenever he passed by. The rhythm of those visits became the softest kind of comfort. Unspoken, steady, real. Still, Dry Creek noticed. Dry Creek always noticed. By the second week, the general store buzzed with whispers. "Beau Ramsey's fixing up Miss Lyle's place. He's been calling regularly. Maybe he's writing letters back east again. Heard. He's courting a mail-order bride." That last rumor reached Martha through Mrs. Dobbins, who delivered it with false sweetness and sharp eyes. "Well, dear," Mrs. Dobbins had said, standing too close to the counter, "I'm sure it's nice to feel useful, helping him prepare for someone new." Martha managed a polite smile. "It's just business." But that night, when she closed up, her hands trembled as she folded the muslin gown. A mail-order bride. Of course that made sense. A man like Beau, steady, hard-working, would want a woman unburdened by the town's talk, someone fresh and fair. She tried to be glad for him. Instead, she found herself staring at the half-sewn sleeves and wondering who they'd touch when the day came. A week later, a storm rolled across the plains, fierce and sudden. The wind howled against the windows, rattling the glass. Martha was securing the curtains when a hard knock came at the door. Beau stood there, soaked to the bone, hat dripping. "Your shop," he said breathlessly. "The back window's blown open. I saw the rain getting in." Together, they ran inside, gathering up fabric before the water ruined it. Bolts of satin, lace, and ribbon piled high in their arms. They worked wordlessly, moving in rhythm until everything was safe. When it was done, they stood in the dim light, rain pounding outside, both of them dripping, wet and breathless. Martha looked at him, hair plastered, face streaked with rain, and something in her chest shifted. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I couldn't let you face it alone." She tried to speak but couldn't. Her hands fidgeted with a soaked scrap of cloth. "I'll fix that window tomorrow," Beau added quietly. "Can't have your shop leaking." Then he smiled, not the polite kind men gave in passing, but one that reached his eyes. Warm, gentle, real. It lingered long after he left, fading into the rhythm of the rain, and though Martha told herself he was only being kind, something in her heart whispered otherwise. Maybe, just maybe, the dress wasn't only for hope. Perhaps it was for something still waiting to be named. The storm raged through the night, tearing branches from cottonwoods and turning the dirt road to brown rivers. By morning, Dry Creek was a puddle of mud and broken fences. Martha had barely slept. The roof had leaked above her work table, and she'd spent hours moving her sewing machine from one spot to another to keep it dry. When she stepped outside at dawn, the street was littered with debris, and behind her shop, the small shed where she kept bolts of fabric had collapsed under the weight of rain. Her heart dropped. She ran through the muck trying to salvage what she could. The dresses she'd spent months sewing were soaked through, lace ruined, dyes bleeding into muddy swirls. Her throat tightened as she pressed her palms against the sagging frame. "Please no, Martha." She turned. Bo Ramsey stood at the gate, sleeves rolled, boots splattered, a hammer tucked in his belt. Without another word, he waded through the mess and began lifting the fallen boards. "Bo, you shouldn't," he shook his head. "You'll ruin your hands if you try to fix this alone." Together they worked in silence, mud sucking at their boots. The rain came again in bursts, soaking them both, but neither stopped until the last fabric bolt was safe inside. When they finally stepped into the shop, drenched and trembling, Bo reached for a towel she kept by the stove. "Sit," he said quietly. "You're shaking," Martha obeyed. Her fingers fumbled with the kettle, but Bo took it from her, poured 2 mugs of tea and set one before her. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm easing outside. Then Bo spoke. His voice was low, careful. "I lost my wife during a rain like this," he said, 5 years back. Fever took her fast. Martha looked up slowly. His expression was calm, but his hands, big, steady hands, were clenched around his mug. "I kept her things," he went on. "Couldn't bring myself to throw them out. The house was full of silence after that. So I buried myself in work. Figured if I kept the ranch running, maybe I wouldn't hear how empty it was." Martha's throat ached. "I'm sorry, Bo," he nodded. "The truth is, I never thought I'd ask anyone to make a wedding dress again." "Not after her," she hesitated. "Then why now?" He leaned back, eyes distant. "Because I got tired of pretending a man's meant to live alone forever. I thought, maybe if I started with a dress, hope might follow." The words hung in the warm air between them. Martha stared into her cup. "I understand what it's like," she said softly. "To lose what you thought was meant for you." He looked at her. "You?" She laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. "Once, long ago, there was a man. Said he'd marry me after his harvest came in. Then he found a girl 10 pounds lighter and 20 years younger." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "After that, I stopped sewing for myself. I figured no one wanted a fat bride, so I stitched for everyone else instead." The words escaped before she could stop them. Bo's gaze didn't falter. He studied her face as though seeing her for the first time. Not the careful smile or the neat bun, but the woman behind the practiced calm. Then quietly he said, "Then I'm no one." The room fell utterly still. Martha froze, the air catching in her lungs. "What did you say?" Bo met her eyes, voice steady. "If no one wants a fat bride, then I'm no one. And I'd call myself blessed to be." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could hide it. "Bo," she whispered, "you shouldn't say things you don't mean." "I don't say what I don't mean," he answered simply. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The storm outside softened to a drizzle, the sound of rain fading into stillness. Martha stood abruptly, flustered. "The tea's gone cold. I should—" But Bo just smiled faintly, not pressing her. He set his cup down and said, "I'll fix that roof tomorrow." Then he took his hat and stepped into the gray light, leaving her standing there, heart thundering, breath trembling, tears she didn't understand staining her face. She turned to the dress on the mannequin, half sewn, threads tangled where she'd left them. For the first time, she didn't see a stranger's wedding gown. She saw herself. The next morning, Dry Creek was alive with gossip. By the time Martha unlocked her shop door, 3 women had already passed by, whispering behind gloved hands. By noon, she knew what they were whispering about. Someone had seen Bo Ramsey leaving her shop late at night, the lantern still burning inside. The story had stretched by morning, that he'd stayed till dawn, that they'd shared tea, that she'd been seen smiling like a girl half her size. In a town like Dry Creek, whispers traveled faster than the stagecoach. Martha tried to ignore it. She stitched through the chatter, head bent low, but the needle pricked her finger more than once that day. By evening, she could barely see for the tears she refused to cry. When she finally looked out the window, she saw Beau at the hitching post waiting with his horse. He tipped his hat through the glass. The smallest smile, she didn't move. When he knocked, she didn't answer. When he called her name, softly she stayed still, pretending not to hear. After a moment, he said something by the door. She caught only the flash of color as he turned to leave. When she finally opened it, there lay a bunch of wildflowers like clover and prairie bluebell, tied together with twine. Martha's breath caught. She lifted them slowly, pressed them to her chest, then hesitated, torn between longing and shame. With trembling hands, she placed them in a jar by the window, and for the first time in years, she locked the shop not out of duty, but to keep her heart from stepping out into the night after him. The next day, the whispers grew meaner. At the mercantile, she heard her name followed by laughter. At the post office, one woman clucked her tongue and muttered, "A man like Beau could do better." Even her oldest clients grew cautious, polite to her face but cold in their eyes. By the week's end, she could no longer stand their pity. When Beau knocked again, she stayed behind the curtain, tears streaking her cheeks. "Please," she whispered to the empty air, "stop coming. You'll only make it worse." But he didn't stop, not entirely. Every few days, another small gift appeared on her porch. A handful of polished stones, a wrapped loaf of bread, a horseshoe mended till it shone, never a note. Never a knock. Just quiet faith, the kind that waited without demanding. Then one afternoon, Mrs. Dobbins entered the shop, eyes bright with something between pity and satisfaction. "Have you heard?" she asked sweetly. "Mr. Ramsey's been offered a fine contract up north. Big ranch wants him to manage the herds. Good money, too. I expect he'll be leaving soon." Martha's needle slipped from her hand. "Leaving?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Dobbins said, pretending surprise. "Surely he's told you. I mean, you two have been—" She stopped, feigning modesty. Martha straightened. "Whatever you've heard, Mrs. Dobbins, I'd thank you to keep it to yourself." The older woman blinked, taken aback by the steel in Martha's tone. Then she smiled thinly and left without another word. But the damage was done. All afternoon, the thought gnawed at her. If Beau was leaving, maybe it was for the best. He deserved a place where gossip didn't follow, where he could start again without her shadow. By sunset, she had convinced herself that's what she wanted. That night, she took the half-finished gown from the mannequin and folded it carefully into a cedar chest. She tried not to notice how her hands shook. She told herself it was just fabric, lace and muslin and thread, nothing more. But as she blew out the lamp, she caught sight of the flowers by the window. Wilted now, their petals curled. Something in her chest ached. "Let him go," she whispered. "He deserves peace." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, and somewhere beyond the ridge, Beau Ramsey lit his lantern, same as always. He didn't ride away. Not yet. And in the morning, a new bunch of wildflowers waited on her porch, no note, no explanation, just color against the gray. Spring came early that year. The prairie turned green again, and Dry Creek buzzed with talk of the annual spring fair, quilts, pies, and contests for everything from pickled beans to best livestock harness. Every woman in town was preparing something. Every woman except Martha Lyle. Her shop stayed shuttered more often than not. She claimed she was catching up on work, but the truth was she could barely bring herself to touch a needle. The joy had gone out of sewing. The laughter that used to spill from the street outside now felt far away, as though it belonged to another life. Each morning, she found herself looking toward the ridge where Beau's ranch sat, waiting for a rider who no longer came. The wildflowers had stopped appearing too. After weeks of silence, she tried to convince herself she preferred it that way. But one evening, Clara Dawson, her closest friend and fellow seamstress, stopped by unannounced. You're not coming to the fair? Clara asked, brushing dust from her skirts as she entered. Martha shook her head. No use showing my face there. Folks have had their fill of talk. Clara crossed her arms. You've hidden in here long enough. That town made you their needle and thread for years. You've mended every tear and hem they've torn. You belong there as much as any of them. Martha looked down at her calloused hands. Belonging isn't the same as being wanted, Clara softened. Martha, listen. You've done nothing wrong. You helped a man fix his roof. Let them gossip, they need stories more than sense. Still, Martha hesitated. I can't bear the looks. Then bear them standing, Clara said firmly. You're stronger than they'll ever admit. When she left, she pressed a folded notice into Martha's hand. It was the fair's announcement for the quilting contest. Theme: Hope Restored. Something about those words struck deep. Hope. Restored. Martha turned the paper over and over that night, unable to sleep. Finally, as dawn began to stretch across the fields, she stood, lit her lamp, and opened the chest that held her unused fabrics. She pulled out scraps from old commissions, lace that never fit right, silk dyed the wrong color, calico remnants from other women's dreams, and began to sew. Her hands moved slowly at first, then with purpose. The quilt began to take shape, each patch a story she'd once kept hidden. Grief, laughter, loneliness, grace. For 3 nights straight, she stitched until her eyes ached. By the end, she wasn't sure if it was beautiful or broken, but it was hers. The morning of the fair arrived bright and clear. The town square was dressed in bunting, laughter echoing under the church bell tower. Martha stood at the edge, clutching her folded quilt. She'd told herself she'd just drop it off and leave quietly. But when she reached the table, a hush rippled through the crowd. Women turned. Men stopped talking. Someone whispered, "Well, look who finally decided to show." Another snickered. Maybe she's here to sell wedding gowns to herself. Martha froze, face burning. She wanted to disappear. Then from the far side of the square came a familiar voice. "Seems to me," Bo Ramsey said, stepping through the crowd. "Some folks in this town have mighty short memories about who holds them together when they come apart." Heads turned. Bo looked straight at Martha, his eyes steady, unashamed. "If it's true," he said, voice carrying clear over the murmurs, "that no one wants a fat bride, then let everyone here know. No one's been waiting for her." A collective gasp spread through the square. The fiddler stopped playing. Even the wind seemed to be still. Martha's heart thundered in her chest. Bo walked forward, hat in hand, his expression calm but resolute. "You've all taken her work, her kindness, her hours, and now you mock the hands that held this town together. Well, I'll tell you plain. I'd be honored to marry a woman like Martha Lyle. Not despite who she is, but because of it." The crowd was silent, startled. Awkward, some ashamed. Martha's knees felt weak. Her throat closed around words that wouldn't come. Clara squeezed her arm from behind. "Don't you dare run," she whispered. Martha didn't. Bo stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "You don't have to answer, Martha, but I meant every word." She looked at him, tears gathering, unable to speak. For years she had hidden behind other people's dreams, and now someone had just made her the center of his. The square was so still that Martha could hear the wind moving through the cottonwoods behind the church. Every eye in Dry Creek was fixed on her. Women holding parasols midair, men pretending not to stare. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Bo Ramsey stood a few paces away, hat clutched in one hand, the other held at his side, palm open. "Martha," he said quietly, "I'm not here to make a spectacle. I just got tired of watching you hide when you've got nothing to be ashamed of." His voice trembled slightly on the last word, not from fear, but feeling. She wanted to disappear. Her cheeks burned, her hands shook around the folded quilt she still held. The silence pressed down like heat. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Bo, please." "They're all watching." He smiled faintly. "Let them." Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a small ring. simple silver shaped like something he might have forged himself. Martha froze. Beau's tone softened. I can't promise fancy. I don't have much, but I've got steadiness. I've got faith. And I've got eyes that don't see what they see you. The air seemed to thicken around them. Martha's throat tightened. Beau, she murmured, tears gathering. Don't do this. They'll laugh. He nodded slowly. They might. But laughter's lighter than regret. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some pity, some awe, some discomfort. Pastor Glenn, standing near the pie table, looked like he was holding back a smile. Beau took another step closer. You told me once no one wants a fat bride, he said. Maybe that's true for someone else. But I've spent too many years working land that only grows after a storm to mistake softness for weakness. Martha's breath hitched. Her instinct was to run, back into her shop, behind her sewing machine, anywhere she could stitch herself invisible again. But Beau's words had sown something stronger than shame inside her. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering a choice. She looked down at her quilt still folded in her hands. The last panel she'd stitched just before dawn bore a single embroidered word in careful script. Faith. She lifted her chin. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. You don't know what you're asking, Beau. I've lived my life being the woman folks whisper about. I've heard them laugh. I've felt them turn away. I don't want to be someone's cause. Beau smiled gently. You'd be no cause. You'd be my partner. My peace. Martha's vision blurred with tears. Around her the crowd rustled again. Someone coughed, a child whispered. Then in the stillness she said, I'm scared. Beau's answer came without hesitation. So am I. He took another step, close enough now that she could see the rain-calloused lines on his face, the soft gray at his temples. But I'll tell you something, he added quietly. Fears never stopped me from building a fence that needed mending, or loving something worth the effort. Martha swallowed hard. You're not ashamed? He shook his head. You'll be the only woman I see. Let them laugh. I'll still be proud. A tear rolled down her cheek. Slowly she reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, warm, real. A collective murmur rose from the crowd, a mixture of surprise and, finally, approval. Pastor Glenn cleared his throat and murmured, Well, I reckon that's a fair start to a promise. Martha laughed through her tears, a soft, trembling sound that broke the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. Beau slipped the simple ring onto her finger. I don't know what comes next, she whispered. He smiled. Then we'll find out together. For a long moment, neither spoke. The town square, once her place of quiet humiliation, now stood as witness to something entirely new. People began clapping, hesitant at first, then stronger. The women who had once whispered lowered their eyes. Clara cheered loudest of all. Beau squeezed her hand. You still holding that quilt? She nodded, laughing through tears. Good, he said softly, because you just stitched us a beginning. Weeks later, Martha's shop felt different. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the lace and silk in a way it hadn't for years. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, and for the first time, it didn't make her chest tighten. Beau Ramsey had returned to the ranch after the fair, but now he came often, sometimes to fetch tools, sometimes to deliver firewood, sometimes just to sit quietly in the corner as she worked. The shop was alive with the sound of her sewing machine again, but this time it wasn't only for the town's brides. Martha unfolded a piece of muslin on her work table. Today it was for her, not for someone else, not for hope, but for herself. The gown she had begun months ago at Beau's request now took on new life. She pinned, stitched, and hemmed with care, hands steady, heart lighter. Beau watched from across the room, quietly admiring the concentration on her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He just leaned against the doorframe, his presence steady, a silent encouragement. When Martha finally held the finished gown against the light, she smiled. The lace shimmered, The satin gleamed and every stitch seemed to hum with possibility. Bo stepped closer. "Looks like it was always meant to hang here," he said softly. She turned to him, laughing through the flutter in her chest. "You've been here every step of the way, whether you knew it or not." He tipped his hat, though now it seemed unnecessary. Someone had to see you. For a moment they just stood there looking at each other. Martha realized she didn't need words to measure the quiet love between them. The trust, the understanding, the unspoken bond that had grown through small gestures, stolen moments and shared storms. Finally, she picked up the gown and walked to the window. The sunlight caught the lace at the bodice, illuminating the intricate details she had once feared would betray her. Bo stepped beside her. "It suits you," he said simply. "Not just the dress, but you." Her heart swelled. For years she had stitched other people's happiness while hiding her own. Now she could finally see it reflected at her, not through the eyes of gossiping townsfolk, not through polite smiles, but in the quiet, unwavering gaze of a man who had chosen her fully. Without reservation, she placed the gown on a mannequin in the center of the shop. The shop no longer felt like a place of solitude. It was a home, a space for creation, for love, for beginnings. Bo reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a perfect fit forged through months of trust. "Shall we see if the rest of Dry Creek can handle this?" he asked with a grin. Martha laughed, a soft, unburdened sound. "Let them try. I've got enough pride and thread to last a lifetime." They stood together by the window, watching the sunlight play across the quilt she had finished for the fair, across the dresses she had made for countless brides, and now across a gown she had made for herself. It was more than a dress. It was a symbol, a declaration that she was worthy of being seen, chosen, and loved just as she was. Bo squeezed her hand. "You're ready," he said. Martha smiled, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. "I think I've always been. I just needed someone to remind me." Outside, Dry Creek carried on with its daily rhythm, unaware of the quiet victory in Martha's shop. Inside, light and love filled the room, mingling with the soft hum of the sewing machine. For the first time, Martha felt wholly at peace. She had stitched hope into fabric, and now, hope had stitched itself into her life. Bo kissed her hand, then her temple, a tender, grounding gesture that spoke more than words ever could. Martha looked around the shop, at the gowns, the quilt, the sunlight, and finally at him. She didn't see judgment or gossip or pity. She saw him, and through him she saw herself, and for the first time, she felt truly seen and wholly loved. If you enjoyed Martha and Bo's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to follow more heartfelt tales from the Wild West. Share your favorite moment in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.